All right, Damien, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. We appreciate your time. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll get into your background there, Grand Circus, in a minute. But we were just talking offline about being a CEO and how there's really no manual for it. So share a little bit about your experience of being a CEO and what it's like.
Well, we were just talking about there's no job that prepares you for it. It doesn't matter if you're young, and I think you said if you're a 34-year-old CEO or if you're a 44-year-old CEO, we all come into the role not really knowing what we're doing, and so that's pretty scary. And I was also sharing that it's I found a lot of value in talking to other CEOs about what they're going through, and that's why I love what you're doing here, because I think it's great if we can shed light on what we're all going through.
You said not really knowing what you're doing. That's a pretty interesting statement, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, essentially that's what it is. I mean, I think you never, and I've talked to people about transitioning from COO to CEO. I always thought that was a pretty simple jump, but there's something about being at the tip of the spear. About having that ultimate accountability that. I don't know if it's the pressure of the job, knowing that there's really no one else to turn to. Obviously, if you have investors and mentors or whatever, you have someone to turn to. But just being at the tip of the spear, as I said, I think is just a very unique feeling.
Well, and it's my experience. Accountability.
I think ultimately that's it.
Yeah, it's the accountability. At least that was my experience. Is the board of directors. I had several boards that I reported to, but they weren't ultimately as accountable as I felt,
right.
in that role, and the burden is significant. How do you deal with it yourselves as you think about the weight of that? How do you deal with the stress or whatever comes from that?
Well, not well sometimes, if I'm really honest. Well, I mean, as I said, I've gotten a lot better at talking to people about it. I have friends who are sort of in leadership positions as well, and that helps me a lot. Just to I have a couple of guys that I have breakfast with pretty regularly, and we'll just talk through issues we're facing, and that really helps me. I think something I've got better at doing is just unplugging from work as much as I can. I think it's sort of cliche, but I think you have to spend time with family and friends and just forget about work. But at the end of the day, easier said than done. It's always there, in my experience.
Yeah. Well, and I get the sense that you love what you do. It's not always easy. It's not like you love it 99 or 100% of the time, but fundamentally right. you do love what you do. And that, I would imagine that helps.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I mean, it's life, right?
Yeah. It's, well, and unplugging, I think, is so important. I know in your case, I see you running by, little insider information, but Damien and I live in the same neighborhood here, just outside of Michigan, about 4 or 5 blocks from Detroit Zoo.
Right.
And it's a great place to go running. What else do you do to kind of check out or take care of yourself?
I love to cook. It's sort of always been something I've been into. Last couple of years, I've gone into meditation, which has really helped me a lot. So I got put onto transcendental meditation. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I do that pretty regularly. And then exercise. That's always been, especially during this kind of weird pandemic. I found that's the single best thing I do. It's just getting outside, getting up a sweat, and just making that part of my routine. It's been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I haven't seen you running, by the way, Tom. Have you been out much lately? I used to love running by you.
I still run quite a bit. I probably every other day sort of pattern. I bought a treadmill, which is hilarious because a few years ago, I literally did not like running. There's a stronger word for it, but I won't use it. But I got a concussion playing soccer that was pretty scary. I couldn't remember my kids' names, and it was bad. So I talked to my uncle, who was a neurologist, and he was kind of walking me through things a couple of weeks afterwards. And I said, well, when can I get back to playing? He said, well, 1 concussion, 2 concussions, not terrible, but it sounds like you've had probably 3, Tom, between soccer and lacrosse. And he said, it starts to get pretty dangerous. And so he said, remind me, how much money do you make playing soccer? That was the sentence that ended my soccer career. So I had to do something, and I finally got into running. I ended up running a half marathon with my good buddy up north in Michigan, and that was a lot of fun. Actually, I really did enjoy it. So ever since then, I've been running and bought a treadmill, and so the rest is history.
Okay, there you go.
But it's important, it is, we kind of throw it off as like, well, yeah, I don't have time for that, right? A lot of CEOs are too busy for that. But there's actual brain science behind that too, that in order to free up our creative thinking, in order to free up our creative mind, there's I forget the number, but it's something like, we have access to about 2 feet of data, if you think about it in that extreme, sort of consciously. But our unconscious mind has access to about 10 football fields worth of information, which is why, you're taking a shower or you're out for a run. I don't know if you've had this experience. You wake up and it's like, whoa, great idea out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, I think a similar sort of idea, like if you think about professional athletes, I mean, they talk about training and then obviously competing, but, more important than competing and training is recovery, right? And that's doing nothing, giving your body a chance to re-energize. So I think that, as leaders, we're always trying to get better as leaders. We're always, we're obviously in the role, but we don't think enough about that downtime and that recovery. And it's sleeping, to be honest. I mean, I think that's a really key thing that people sort of overlook, in addition to sort of just unplugging. So anyway, I think it's a really, really important thing.
No, not anyway. It's one of the most important things. We tend to treat it like, well, anyway, right? We tend
true. I just did it. Yeah.
Tend to blow it off, but it's so critical. What works for you sleep wise? What do you try to get, and how do you create a habit around that?
Well, I can say that it's important. I don't think I do it great, to be honest, but I think that's why I do focus on it. All the normal things like, try to limit device time before bed. I try not to keep my phone next to me when I sleep. Try to read. But, beyond that, I mean, the things that I don't do very well, which I know are important, are sort of, regular times you go to bed. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out. Something it's really helped me actually just becoming smarter about my sleep patterns. It's just, we have this technology now that like enables you to see how effectively you sleep. So a lot of people have a watch or some sort of wearable device that will tell you like how effective your sleep is, and I think that's been really helpful for me as well, just to see how much sleep I'm getting.
Yeah, I just heard that Amazon came out with a new device. What's it called? But it tracks just that, and it actually supposedly tracks your tone, meaning how often are you speaking positively? How often are you excited? How often are you sarcastic? I think, I don't know how good it is, but fascinating.
Fascinating.
Yeah. On the sleep front, I think that's such an important one, because we don't think about it. I mean, the sports analogy is a great one, right? That we know if we want to build up muscle mass, we have to go exercise. We have to go, if you want to build up your bicep, you got to go do some exercise for that bicep. But we don't think about, as leaders, that our primary tool that we have is our brain. And we don't think about giving it mental fitness, providing the fitness that it needs and the rest that it needs, just like any other muscle. You can't exercise your bicep for 14 hours straight. You got to give it rest to help it to grow and improve. So for young leaders out there, young folks who maybe aspire to be a CEO someday like yourself, what advice would you have for them?
Sure, big question. Well, I think the single best piece of advice I could give anybody is to find really good mentors. I mean, it's a really obvious thing, I think, but I've just noticed over the years, the people that I've that have achieved any sort of significant success have always had mentors. I don't think we look for mentors enough as professionals. And I mean, even just when we're talking about the challenges of being a CEO, especially when you're a CEO, but I think at any stage of your career, I would say that's that's a really key thing to do. If you want to be a CEO, I think the other bit of advice I would give you is to do the role before you get it. And by that I mean, if you're at a company that maybe you're in a senior leadership position and you're eyeing off the job, I think starting to show decision makers within the company that you can do the job is a really effective way to position yourself. And it sort of helps you get ready as well. I mean, you get to experience a bit of it. So I think those two things I've noticed have been present for people that have been really successful.
And what about because both of those are fascinating, what about the mentorship is so important, you think?
Well, I mean, we all have blind spots, Tom. And, so I think it's a lot sort of, as you build a relationship with a mentor and they get to know you, they help point out those blind spots, get you through those moments, and then there's always kind of the explicit, the questions that you have, right, that you just need to bounce off somebody. So I think that the related idea is, obviously it's always good to reach out to people and ask them, for advice or insight. But if you can find that person where you have that sort of relationship with, when they get to know you over time, I think that can be, the most impactful type of mentor.
Yeah, and to literally, the other element is, as you say it seems so obvious, but it gives you an opportunity to practice your communication skills and all the things that matter, the soft skills. I just watched Social Dilemma last night. Have you seen that yet? Yeah,
I've seen bits of it. I had to stop watching. It was a little scary.
Yeah, it is. I didn't sleep well last night. But it strikes me that so many young people rely on sort of the conduit of technology for relationships, and I think it's important to highlight here that I think you're talking about mentorship, person to person, human to human, talking to each other, getting together for coffee, doing lunches. Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the second idea you thought there was doing the job before you get the job. Say more.
Well, so I know that, and I'm just sort of reflecting on people that have done well at Grand Circus, and I think as leaders, and I guess it's sort of interesting to sort of put look at people that work for you and see what makes them effective in your eyes, and think that I've always appreciated. I mean, there's two types of people. There's one type of person who maybe has been with you for a long time, who feels there's a certain entitlement that the next role will just come to them. And that's often the argument. I've been here for 5 years, I've always worked hard here, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the other type of person who just starts to stretch their role, starts to show that they have additional capabilities and just makes your life easier as a leader, right? And I'm talking about sort of, in my case, members of my leadership team. And so when I look at those sorts of people, those two types of people, I'm always going to do everything I can for that second type to help elevate them. And so I think it's literally that. It's like looking at the role you want to be in, if it's a CEO role, and figuring out the pieces of that role that you can start to show that you're capable of doing. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's pretty simple, a pretty simple thing to do.
Yeah, it's
a simple thing to say, but a hard thing to do, I should say.
Sort of an entrepreneurial mindset, I think I hear you saying. Someone that's willing to just kind of take the ball and run with it and go get stuff done.
Well, yeah, but I think it's also about just, how you position yourself. Everybody wants that promotion, everybody wants the job, but I think, I don't think we naturally think about how we're viewed by others, and I think that's a really effective way to kind of raise yourself, relative to the pack.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's you brought up Grand Circus, so that's a great lead into.
Yeah.
What are you up to there? What's Grand Circus all about?
Well, like the rest of the world, we're trying to figure out how to be remote. So we're a what's called a coding bootcamp, which is a program that takes people from an interest in technology, trains them intensively for 12 weeks full-time or 24 weeks part-time, so they can get the skills to get a job as a software developer. So 0 to 60, in 12 weeks or 24 weeks. And so for the most part, for most of our 8 years, we've been an in-person training experience. And then with the pandemic and everything that's happened this year, had to transition to remote delivery, in the blink of an eye. So that's what we're in the middle of. It's working, but, that's kind of been most of our 2020, trying to figure out how to train effectively online.
And what does that mean for the future, you think? What have you learned from this? What innovation have you gotten that you can maybe apply as you go forward post-pandemic?
Well, yeah, innovations maybe still too soon to say. I think we're always looking at. The obvious one is, it's very different to sit in a classroom for 8 hours than to be on screen for 8 hours, right? So, I guess we've been looking at ways to reduce screen time and just break up that classroom experience a little bit. But I'd say that the opportunity for us, which I'm really excited about, I think that we'll have remote's sort of the new normal for us. We'll have in-person classes eventually, but what I'm excited about in our business, we need to recruit. The business doesn't work without instructors, and instructors typically people have had a career in development, software development, really hard to find. And finding developers that can also teach are sort of unicorns in our business.
Yeah.
So I think what's pretty cool about being remote is that it opens up a national talent pool for us, which I think is going to be pretty exciting. I think that's the way I think about this, and we'll continue to innovate as we learn more and more about how to teach remotely. But luckily, Tom, we've had pretty good outcomes. We were a little nervous when we started this, and it's been going really great.
I would imagine too that the international students too, there's now literally you have access to the entire world.
We do.
Classes.
We do. Time zones are a bit of a limiting factor, but what's nice about being in the Midwest is that we're very time zone friendly. You can pick up students on the West Coast and the East Coast. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely part of the opportunity. It means more competition though, which is the other side. But I think that it's definitely, we're feeling very, very good about our remote future, to be honest.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's fascinating. I just talked to a guy yesterday in India, about how we might be able to help his team growing. They're growing like crazy. And, I think I got off the phone and I thought what world do we live in now where that's even remotely a possibility that we could actually help a team of folks halfway around the world,
awesome.
Wouldn't even cross my mind, a year ago. So awesome. It's one of those sort of forced innovations. I can't take too much credit for it. What other advice do you have? Maybe not so much as a CEO, but just as as a way to be helpful to young up and coming leaders. That's kind of where the source of this podcast started, was to really be a real conversation with real leaders. Not a bunch of sort of tactical stuff that you should do, so that young people could hear from real leaders about what they're facing, what challenges they're facing. You brought up before imposter syndrome. What other advice would you have for people that are looking to grow in their careers and to maybe become, maybe not necessarily a CEO, but to become a leader of a team?
So it sort of relates a little bit to, when I was talking about how it's important to position yourself, maybe relative to others that want that next, that leadership role. I would say something that we don't do very well as employees or as individuals is think about that question and in particular, what we're really good at. I think that's a very difficult question to answer. And I think a lot of us give it sort of, superficial attention when, maybe we're interviewing for a job and everybody, plans for that strengths and weaknesses question. But I think that really understanding what you're good at and finding ways to exploit that is really important as a leader. Someone once told me, a bit of advice they gave me was that you leverage your strengths on the way up and then you cover them when you get there, which is sort of what CEOs have to be able to do. You have to be able to find people that can cover your weaknesses and make you look better. But I think for someone aspiring for that that role, you've got to figure out what you're good at and make sure that any opportunity you have, you demonstrate that strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminds you of the whole idea of what got you here won't get you there, that you've got to continually grow and continue to change and to adapt and to, otherwise you're stuck in the past usually pretty quickly.
Right. So that's a big piece of advice, but not easy to do, as I said.
Easier said than done, like much of this.
Right, exactly.
What about on the culture front? As you think about your Grand Circus team, and you guys have grown quite a bit over those 8 years, how do you think about fostering a productive, enjoyable culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously the pandemic has made all of that way harder. I would say the things that we focus on and that I've found have been the most effective things for culture are really two things. One is, well, obviously there's business performance and keeping people accountable and all of that. But I would say one is acknowledging people. I think showing gratitude for your teams, and just we try to do it at Grand Circus, and we talk about shout outs at a lot of meetings that we have, team meetings. So I think acknowledging people, showing that you're grateful and giving really positive feedback, public positive feedback is huge for culture. And I'd say the other thing, which again, easier said than done, is just to have fun. I think it's really interesting to me, and I've noticed this at points of our history. When you look at people sort of complaining about how hard they're working, they're not having as much fun, in my experience. The times that we've been having a lot of fun as a team, we've worked our asses off. Yeah. So I think that, and there are simple ways to do that. It's okay to be silly and just just sort of have that be part of sort of the company mindset. But I'd say that they're two things that, especially in the pandemic, because let's face it, 2020 is not fun. And there's a lot of bad news and a lot of bad, bad stuff kind of floating around. It's sort of good to sort of celebrate the positive. So I think they're two things that I would say are really important.
Mm-hmm. I just had a thought that completely escaped my brain, Damien. It was a good one too. Oh, having fun. I was reflecting on your upbringing, obviously. Maybe not so obvious for everyone, but you grew up in Australia. That's why you've got that unfair competitive advantage of your accent. And I'm curious, how does your background, I guess, influence your ability to lead and your ability to kind of have fun? Where does that source of fun come from, you think?
Well, I think for Australians, we just don't take ourselves seriously. I mean, there's a certain irreverence, we call it taking the piss, that Australians, are just the way we are. So I'd say that that's at the heart of it. I try to do that. I mean, I'm not sure if that's sort of the reason we have fun at Grand Circus. I don't actually, and this is the other thing. I think what's really hard about having fun is that, it has to feel organic. If as a CEO, you're saying, okay, today, guys, we're scheduling a 30-minute, fun session, or go out and have, it doesn't work. And so I would say that, and it's been hard, I'll be honest with you, like, especially over the course of the last 10 months or so. Like I said, there hasn't been much fun about 2020. So I don't know that I necessarily have a role in it, other than I do my best to enable it. And I really appreciate people on my team that just have this sort of instinctive ideas that are really interesting and fun for the team to participate in. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that just being open to it is really what has made me most effective in kind of getting out of the way.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if what I consider fun other people would think is fun, Tom.
Well, but you're empowering it. You're fostering. Yeah. You're helping to make it not just okay, but actually encouraging it, whether you're the source of it or not. I think that's a huge role that a CEO can play, a leader can play. And that background, of Australia is a fascinating one. I never really thought about it that way. But yeah, now that you say it out loud, it's like, oh yeah, I can see that. And folks that I've met, there is a sort of a more simple joy of life, and a reverence that is healthy, not in a bad way, but in a really good way. I think that we as Americans could learn a lot from.
I'd like to think so, but I'm a little biased, so I'll let you say that.
Well, you've got that about you. You've got a very easy way about you. You're easy to be with, and I would imagine that's very attractive for your team. It's a very compelling reason to work with you and for you. So, thanks, Tom. So, go ahead.
No. That's it. I was going to say, if you had them on here, they might say differently, but we'll run with that.
So, last question. I always usually ask. There's a great sentence. I usually ask CEOs for a book recommendation. Either a leadership book or just. Right now I'm reading Endurance. Have you heard of this? About Shackleton going down to the Antarctica. I'm like, it is intense. It's an awesome, awesome book. So it's sort of a leadership book, but not really. So the options are wide open. What book or books would you recommend?
So there's a book I've been telling people about a little bit lately. Have you heard of $1 Trillion Coach by Bill Campbell?
$1 Trillion Coach? No.
Yeah. So there's this guy, Bill Campbell, who I think was chairman of Intuit, was actually a college football coach, I want to say, got into business and brought a lot of his sort of, coaching, approaches into the world of business. But as a business coach, was a huge influence on Sergey and Larry at Google and Eric Schmidt, Steve Jobs, basically a who's who of Silicon Valley. I mean, you talk to any of these guys, he was the single reason that they were successful. So that's why they call him the $1 Trillion Coach, because he's created $1 trillion in value in theory. Anyway, so this is a very simple read, and I think Eric Schmidt, who's the former chairman of Google, was one of the authors. So it's just one of these books that really talks about Bill's philosophies, and sorry about the background noise. Can you hear that?
A little bit. It's not too bad.
Okay. So, I'll give you one example which I think is a really effective, Bill Campbell sort of, tool. So he talks about, at the beginning of any meeting, he talks about the trip report. Have you heard this idea?
No, I don't think so.
So basically, what he would do at the beginning of every meeting, he would ask people what they did on their weekends. Or at Google, people travel a lot. He'd ask them for a trip report, which is, so tell me about the trip, the most recent business trip you're on. And really the insight there is when you start a meeting, when you speak about those things, it's an opportunity for people to share something personal about themselves. And also when you talk about something personal, it's impossibly pissed. You think about the meetings that you have with people where everybody's come in from maybe a stressful situation somewhere else, or they're just in a shitty mood. Sorry, to swear. But it completely takes the wind out of it just to open up a meeting with that sort of segue. So anyway, there's just one interesting tactic that he's used with, and I think across Google they use that pretty, I guess it's fairly widespread, at least at the leadership levels. So anyway, so that's Bill Campbell, and I think it's a good book, easy to read, and there's lots of really interesting insights in it.
I love it. It's a lot of what we talk about is sort of who you're being is more important than what you say, and allowing people to bring some positive energy and getting them recentered on, what matters. It's a brilliant strategy, as opposed to just kind of what we tend to do is jump right into the content of the meeting, and people are distracted or they're frustrated or they're still mad about the last meeting. I love it. Yeah, interesting tactic. Awesome. Well, thanks for the time again, Damien, and have a wonderful week and weekend.
You too, Tom. We'll see you soon, hopefully.